Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Patti Peeples with the Peeples Collaborative, and welcome to the next episode of Patti's People, sponsored by the Evidence Base. Today, I'm joined by patient engagement and HTA expert, Dr. Walter Toro. Welcome, Walter.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Walter is currently serving as the Executive Director of Global HEOR and Real-World Evidence with Novartis Gene Therapies. So why don't we get started on this? Walter, I know that you've been working extensively in this arena of patient engagement and HTA involvement. Can you give us an historical perspective in terms of how patients have been engaged in HTAs?
Yeah, this is kind of a long story, but I want to make it short. The first HTA was set up in the United States in 1976. That was called the OTA. And from the very beginning, they considered to include the implications of the technology for the patient. You know, the patient perspective is very, very important because it can bring a lot of information for the assessment related with the burden of the disease, the design of the clinical trials, the ways to improve adherence, and also to inform what are the barriers or the hurdles to access the treatment. So they initially consider only the implications of the technology in terms of the outcome, specifically the quality of life, and they were very focused on the result, if it's normally active or moderately restricted or physically disabled after the treatment. But the conversation started several years ago. Then the HTAs have been evolving. And for example, in 2001, the Danish Center for HTA published an HTA handbook, including how to provide the models and how to provide the dossier in terms of the clinical effectiveness and the cost effectiveness, and they included the patient aspects, the same ones I mentioned before. Later on in Europe, the EUNITA in 2016 published what they call 9 quality domains, and they included the health problem and current health technologies, safety, clinical effectiveness, cost, economic evaluation, and so on. And then they included patient and social aspects as well. The thing here is that even if the patient has been considered for a while, the participation of the patient in a very active manner has not been seen so far. I mean, some of the countries have opened some spaces for participation, but I'm going to tell you later on how can we classify in categories the participation of the patients, and also how the technology or the science has been evolved in order to gather or to retrieve information and evidence for the patients. And last but not least, and this is probably the last point in this answer, EUNITA in 2023, last year, they published what is called the patient involvement guidance. And this is going to be very useful for the new framework in Europe, which is the JCA, or the new HTA in Europe. JCA stands for Joint Clinical Assessment.
And has this been a natural evolution over the decades, or was there a specific trigger that has led to this?
That's a very good question. My perspective is this has been natural evolution because now patients are better organized. So you can see patient advocacy groups for several diseases, specifically in rare diseases. They are very active and they are very knowledgeable as well. Mm-hmm. So now you can find experts in the patient group that they can provide a lot of information and can provide a lot of expertise and ideas for the HTA assessment. Mm-hmm. So I would say that at the very beginning, it was only few people and few patients and also citizens, generally speaking, participating here and there. And now you can see more organized people, more organized patients. You have patients that are very active, or patient organizations that are very active, and even are considered as part of the process and the decision making in some parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Walter, what is considered patient involvement in HTAs? Can you operationalize this so that we're all on the same page?
Yeah, this is very important. When you consider to talk about patient involvement, you need to take into account basically two things. One is the research in order to get evidence from the patient perspective, and two is the participation itself. So let's talk about participation. Participation is about the testimony or the consultation or the representation of the patients, and there are a lot of levels of participation into the different stages in the HTAs. I can explain this later on. And greater patient and public participation definitely is advocated, not only now, but for the future, especially with the changes that we are seeing in Europe and in the United States. So international collaborations are encouraged to develop a very, very robust patient-based evidence for HTA. Mm-hmm. This is about participation. About research and retrieving the evidence, this is more focused on the scientific methods that are used to determine patient experiences, the views from the patient perspective, the preferences that are crucial in the HTA research process. Mm-hmm. So those methods could be both qualitative or quantitative, and I can talk about that later on as well.
So you mentioned international collaboration. There is enormous variability in the economic conditions across countries, disease prevalence, and focus on research as an important activity within the country. Could you provide some insight into how patient participation varies worldwide?
Yeah. This is very important in order to understand where we are about the participation in HTA and what are the gaps. So, for example, I can say that there are 5 different categories. We can group patient and patient participation in different groups, from the very basic, which is only retrieving information from secondary sources like publications, or just asking experts or group of experts mm-hmm. to get this data. This is very basic participation. And the other end is, let's say, more developed, which is patients, or especially group of patients, actively participating in the process, and also being there in the deliberation and the decision-making process itself. So there is a kind of a spectrum that you can see from those 2 points. So let me give you some examples and explain a little bit, because there are similarities and differences in the countries, and this is due to ideological, developmental, and also cultural factors, mm-hmm. and also because the goals of the stakeholders can vary. Some of the goals are more conducive to patient involvement than the others. So starting from the very beginning, talking about secondary sources of information and so on, I can give you some examples from a publication. The most recent publication I found was in 2017. It's very difficult to find information about this specific topic, especially when you try to analyze this systematically, but they provided very good examples. In Denmark, at regional level, and also in Sweden and Italy by Agenas, they have been retrieving information from publications and also using expert groups and primary data. So this is the first category. It's not that bad, but it's not too much. Mm-hmm. The next category, remember that I mentioned that there are 5 categories. The second category is when patients are able to submit individually the comments from the experts associations or their own comments in a specific part of the HTA assessment. Mm-hmm. So we have examples, let's say in UK with NICE, in Brazil with the CONITEC, in Colombia with the IETS, and also in Taiwan. And specifically taking as an example Taiwan, they provide a very limited, let's say, room for participation. They only allow 300 characters for a comment to be included as part of the process. And as you can imagine, they receive a lot of comments from patients, from citizens. And yeah, they are good, but probably they are not too much informed, or they are not.
300 characters is not very much to discuss a patient experience.
Exactly. And it's only taking the individual experience, not other group experience, right? Mm-hmm. The third category is also patient submission, but now it's not by individuals, it's by patient groups, patient advocacy groups, or patient networks, even consortiums. And this is great because it's more systematic. They need to align before sending the comments. And some examples you can find in Australia with the PBAC, in Germany with the EQUIC, in Scotland with the SMC, also in Canada as well.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth category is when the patient is not only submitting, but also is included in the process as an individual. They are individual advocates. They can participate in different groups during the HTA assessment process. They can go to committees and they can be in public forums. Again, we have NICE from England. We have the GBA in Germany. We have Sweden, Australia, and Canada. They have been very open to provide the patient a place as a member in some of the committees or some of the groups.
Mm-hmm.
And last but not least, and this would be a perfect situation for patient participation, is that they are able not only to be part of the process, but also able to have a voice and voting in the deliberation process and the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
So again, NICE has been very advanced in this part, Germany as well with the EQUIC,
Mm-hmm.
Scotland with the SMC. But I would say that starting next year and due to the JCA, I mentioned before, and all these changes in Europe, the patient participation will evolve even quicker, and they can get some good positions in some of the countries in order to deliberate and making decisions for their own benefit. So I think the future is going to be better.
Mm-hmm. It sounds it. So it ranges in these 5 categories from secondary resources all the way up to patients actually engaged in the decision-making process. With the new guideline for patient engagement in JCAs, how specifically will the JCA impact patient involvement?
We cannot not yet because it's not already implemented. Everything is starting in January 2025. But I can say in advance that this has been well received, very well received. Mm-hmm. Is going to prioritize individual and group patients, specifically with collective disease expertise, also patient advocacy groups. Mm-hmm. And the patient can provide insights into the treatment pathways and can assess the study design and support the development of the PICO questions, mm-hmm. In the scoping. And also it's expected that patients can provide input during the whole JCA process and participate in the national assessments as well.
So Walter, you've touched on the fact that patient involvement can range from both research into the patient aspects as well as direct patient participation in HTA. What are the expected outcomes for each, and what are the differences?
Well, this is a very good question. Participation is everything about information, and research is about evidence. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of differences. So, for example, regarding the information that we retrieve through the participation of the patients in the HTA assessment, the origin is their own perspectives. The methodology is not specific. I mentioned differences or nuances between the different HTAs agencies in the world. The quality could be subjective, and there is a diversity of the perspectives, and they can provide this at any point of the HTA process. It's kind of a dialogue reaction system, and in some cases could be biased because we are talking about information mm-hmm. From several people, right? Mm-hmm. I am not saying that this is good and bad. Information through participation is very important for the people making decisions or participating in the HTA process to have the big picture and to take into account all these perspectives, right? Mm-hmm. From the research perspective, which is more about the evidence, we are talking about published research that's went through a scientific process, had a peer review process and then was published, it used a range of methodologies that has been approved. Is kind of more clear. The quality can have limitations, of course, but you have quality check and you have peer review before publishing. And about the timing, it takes time. Research takes time, both primary or secondary research, but the scope is comprehensive and is less biased. I want to say unbiased totally, but you know that in a publication you need to provide limitations and you need to discuss all the sources and methodologies and perspectives that were used in order to put together that evidence to be published.
So let's dig a little bit more into the evidence side. What are some of the barriers and enablers to patient-based evidence? Tell us a little bit more about this, and how is it different or similar to what we've currently been doing?
Well, I think one of the most important enablers is the paradigm shift that we are walking through those 5 categories and trying to put the participation in the last one. And the same happens with the evidence and the research because we need to use new methodologies and we need to be more efficient using them. So the paradigm shift is going to be helpful as an enabler. Also, there are a lot of people currently talking about patient-based evidence. So we are raising the status of this evidence and we need to move from the traditional way of assessing technology, which is more focused on clinical outcomes and economic outcomes. So modeling from the economic perspective has been kind of the focus of most of the HTA assessments so far. So now bringing the patient with both participation and the evidence is going to be more comprehensive and it's going to be more patient-centric. Also, it is important to ensure that the funding is available because now with all the regulation, it's not only about the process and the time consumed by the experts and by the patients and so on, but also we need the funds. You need funds to improve the patient participation. You need funds to develop new methodologies, to retrieve evidence, and so on. Another enabler could be the conceptual and methodological development. So we currently have more and better methodologies in order to retrieve that evidence. And last but not least, the support from the HTA community, the patient and the patient organizations as well. So I'm very positive about the enablers, but also there are barriers, a lot. And the most important barrier is the lack of knowledge, or let's say the status of the knowledge from different groups, like what patients know about patient-based evidence, what the people making decisions at the HTAs know about the patient-based evidence, and so on. Another barrier could be lack of leadership in some points, because there are a lot of interest and goals. I mentioned at the beginning that the stakeholders could have different goals, and some of those goals can conduct to open the HTA process for more participation and also for receiving or considering the evidence from the patient perspective. Another barrier could be the methodology itself. As mentioned, we have better methodologies, but they have room for improvement. And let's say could be the robust patient-based evidence. We don't have enough or sufficient patient-based evidence right now, and we need to research a little bit more.
In terms of knowledge on the methodologies, do you think our industry has the knowledge internally, or are we going to have to go beyond our group of experts and look more deeply into other industries, sociology, psychology, and really form relationships in a deeper way than we currently are?
Yeah, I think that's part of the answer to your own question, Patti. Industry has been more focused on quantitative methods. So, for example, using DCEs, which is the discrete choice experiments, for quantifying people's priorities. Industry has been using that for a while,
Yeah.
but from the anthropologic and sociologic perspective, there are a lot of methodologies, qualitative methodologies that we need to use more and put all those together, the qualitative and the quantitative. Um, um, I think there is room for improvement from the industry, but also we need to have that from the HTA perspective. They need to use that data. They need to use that methodologies as well in order to make decisions.
Patient involvement, really common in general term. And of course, it means different things to different people, as you've been alluding to. What specific methodologies do exist for measuring what matters to patients? And talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of those.
Well, I can mention what are the most common ones. So let me mention those ones that I remember, and then I can say something about the two or three more used so far. So one is the patient-reported and relevant outcome measures. Is it called PROMs? The other, I already mentioned the discrete choice experiments, the DCEs, and you can add the swing weighting methodologies in that place. There is another one which is called AHP, Analytic Hierarchy Process. Another one is the ethnographic fieldwork, including participant observation and ethnographic interviews. You have the multi-criteria decision analysis, the MCDA, and all the deliberative methods, the social media listening and analysis, and the qualitative evidence synthesis. But let me say something about three of them. The patient-reported outcome measures, or the PROMs, they aim to bridge the gap between the clinician's understanding and patient experiences. But many of these lack the patient-centeredness. Talking about the stated preference methods like the DCEs, they are used for quantifying people's priorities. They offer tools for getting this quantification of the priorities, but they require scrutiny for internal logic and consistency, as well as consideration of external validity. And about the MCDA, which is the multi-criteria decision analysis approaches, we can include the analytic hierarchy process. They can enhance decision making in terms of the transparency, but they also can raise questions about the preference elicitation and the validation among stakeholders. So, Patty, there is no perfect methodology. All of them, they have the pros and cons, and we need to put that in a balance in order to use the better one, depending on the situation or the question you want to answer, and to take into account always the limitations and the possible biases.
So you mentioned we need to consider all of those and make it situation specific. Are we currently knowledgeable enough to decisively make a choice between those methodologies? Is that knowledge base of where we're shooting to go there yet? Or is it more that if you have the money, you go for a more complicated technique, and if you don't have the research dollars, then you might pursue something a little simpler, and that's simply the way the decisions are made?
Yeah, well, there are criteria in order to use one or the other methodologies. It depends on the research question, of course, and depends also on the timing and the funds allocated. I wouldn't say you need to use all of them. You just need to use the one that is going to provide you an answer with good quality and with less limitations. So it depends on the situation, Patty. We don't need to use all of them at the same time.
Obviously, we're going to adapt these HTA methodologies to better incorporate patient involvement, and also with an eye toward some of our emerging healthcare challenges. What in the future is the biggest change that you see that we should be ready for? I know you've touched on several of the options, but is there something cohesive that you can say this is a sea change?
It's going to be a long list, Patty, because I can see a lot of changes in HTA and also in the future patient involvement. So let's start talking about the influence on innovation. Patient or the patient input is increasingly shaping the technology innovation. They are able to participate in the clinical trial design. So in that conversation, which is good, in the past, it is kind of rare to see PROs, patient-reported outcomes, throughout the clinical trial. So the clinical trials were more focused on clinical outcomes, but you can use a kind of a piggyback analysis with PROs at the same time. So they can, the patient can provide a lot of input in the patient outcome measures and the regulatory assessment, and also in the post-marketing monitoring. Another point is the impact of the assessment, because there is an uncertainty regarding the extent to which patient involvement influences the HTA processes in decision making, with very limited indicators of the impact. Remember, I mentioned that it's difficult to find publications focused on systematically describing or assessing the participation of the patients, but most importantly, what are the outcomes of this participation? What has been the impact? Let's say for those 5 categories, what was the impact of each of those categories at that time? Another factor to consider is the technological uncertainty, because patient involvement could play a very crucial role in assessing technologies, and with high uncertainty, such as the breakthrough therapies and medicines for rare diseases. Another one is the traditional methods. I think HTA traditionally relies on randomized control trials or clinical trials, on systematic reviews and the cost effectiveness analysis, which may not fully accommodate patient-based evidence. So they need to open themselves to include that evidence as well. The lack of evolution, it was clear when they published those 5 categories. The evolution has been with a very slow pace, and despite increasing the patient involvement, the HTA processes have significantly evolved to meet the needs of the new technologies, lacking indications of the necessary change processes as well. And just for mentioning another one, I would say the global considerations, because the evolution of the HTAs, when you compare one country with another, you can see a lot of gaps, especially in the low and the middle income countries. There are a lot of challenges. Let's say one of the most important is the resource allocation and the expertise and the knowledge for setting up an HTA process and making decisions with it. There are more, but I would say that those are some of the most important now.
I think if I was an executive in industry, I would certainly applaud all of these changes that are moving forth in our industry for true, better patient involvement in decision making. But I would also be thinking that, wow, this is really going to add to my total research cost. What would you say to an industry executive?
I totally agree. I think we need to invest more on this, not only on patient participation, but also in retrieving the evidence from the patient perspective. Everybody in the industry is currently patient-centered and trying to do their best in order to include the patient perspective and the patient evidence as well. And I'm very glad that the regulatory bodies are doing the same. And so this is going to bring us to a very good point where the technology assessment will be done with more, let's say, points of view, but also taking into account the evidence that they need to provide good technology for what the patient needs, actually. And this is going to be good for everybody.
Indeed. What else is necessary for us to continue on this path successfully?
I think we need to be open to learn about experiences in other parts of the world. We need to work together with the regulatory bodies to be open to the new frameworks for HTA assessment, to continue working with patients associations or patient advocacy groups, to increase the level of knowledge and awareness about these processes as well, and politically talking to be more open to patients, to be more patient-centered in everything that we do. And we need patients in not sit down as member of a committee. We need them to have voice and vote and to be able to be part of the decision making of the technology that actually is for them.
So true voting power.
Exactly.
Really exciting. What is your call to action, Walter?
Well, generally speaking, it's imperative for stakeholders in healthcare, including governments and also the healthcare providers and the patient advocacy groups and the industry, to collaborate and actively drive the evolution of the HTA methodologies. And this entails fostering transparency, facilitating meaningful patient involvement, and promoting the research into more adaptable HTA frameworks that prioritize patient-centered outcomes to address the complexities of the modern healthcare landscapes. I have a specific ask for each of those groups. So for the patient groups, they need to work with all the stakeholders in order to develop patient involvement processes that actually improve the quality of the research in HTA. My ask for academics is to develop more methodologies or to improve the methodologies that we currently have, including rapid qualitative evidence synthesis and media research, all these ethnographic and sociologic methodologies that we mentioned before, which can meet HTI timeline requirements in order to display the value of the research and to push to be involved in the HTA.
I heard an important word in that one, which was synthesis.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about the synthesis. We are gathering the information, but it's not coalesced appropriately.
Well, it's in the qualitative methodologies, you gather a lot of information because you have a lot of open questions as well. And you need to summarize this information and to put it in a way that has internal validation and also makes sense in order to be taken into account for a decision-making process. So that is what is called the evidence synthesis process when you use qualitative information.
Okay. All right. So you've said academics and patient groups, and you're going to ask for the next.
For the health technology developers, the manufacturers, the industry, to continue incorporating patient involvement in their technology development programs. And they can use sound methodologies and report on this work transparently, as they have been doing so far. And last but not least, the HTA bodies to define their goals. They are actually doing that in Europe with the new system in 2025, or even here in the United States, ICER has been very clear about the methodology, and they are continue evolving as well. So they need to develop and evaluate all the processes for patient involvement and implement the HTAI values on quality standards for patient involvement in HTA that were published years ago.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions, and these will have rapid fire responses as well. Walter, what's one thing we have gotten right with patient involvement?
I think we have been working close with patient advocacy groups and patient organizations. From the manufacturer perspective, they have worked a lot with patient registries or disease registries. They had set up collaboration agreements in order to research and to gather information from patients and so on. So I think this has been done for a while and has been developing a little bit more.
On the other hand, what have we gotten wrong?
I think to be focused on quantitative methodologies, we are losing all the information that we can get from the qualitative methodologies. So I would say that we are scientists and we focus more on the hard evidence that we can get from the quantitative methods. And as I explained before, we need to get information from both.
Yeah. And lastly, if we have this conversation a decade from now, what do you think will be most surprising that has happened?
This is in my bucket list. I would love to see patients as part of the governance in the HTA.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, short answer, but this is my dream.
Yeah. This has been so illuminating and enlightening, and I really hope that we see worldwide increased patient involvement and from both the information sharing as well as the decision making, and as you say, eventually the governance. Walter, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. It has been a pleasure.